In my 40 years studying the architecture of great power competition, I have never witnessed a more predictable tragedy unfold in real time when I learned last month that NATO had formally begun its expansion into territories that sit directly on Russia's strategic border, territories that Moscow has repeatedly, explicitly, and unambiguously declared to be within its sphere of vital interest. I realized something that shook me to my core. We are watching the West sleepwalk toward a confrontation that every principle of geopolitical realism predicted would happen. And Russia's response, it was not irrational. It was not aggressive. It was textbook power politics, exactly as it had to be. What happened was the inevitable collision of two incompatible visions of European order. And the blame for this moment lies not with Moscow, but with Washington's 30-year campaign of imperial overreach. Let me be precise about what just occurred. NATO, the military alliance created explicitly to contain Soviet power during the Cold War, has now begun the process of expanding into regions that sit on Russia's western frontier. This is not about small NATO members requesting protection. This is about the collective West, led by Washington, systematically moving military infrastructure, command centers, and armed forces into territories that Russia has made crystal clear are part of its sphere of legitimate strategic concern. The expansion includes forward deployments of NATO troops, the establishment of new military bases, increased NATO air operations near Russian airspace, and the integration of Ukrainian military forces into NATO command structure. In response, Russia has done exactly what any great power would do. It has shifted its military posture, new deployments, strategic force movements, nuclear capable bombers repositioned, updated doctrine, a clear signal that Moscow will not be encircled without consequence. This is not an act of Russian aggression. This is an act of Russian survival, and the Western media frames it as unprovoked militarism, which is perhaps the most dangerous misreading of geopolitical reality we could possibly commit. To understand this moment, you must understand what came before. After the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the United States found itself in an unprecedented position, the sole superpower with no great power rival. And what did Washington do with that power? It made the greatest strategic error in modern history. Rather than designing a security architecture that would integrate Russia into a post-Cold War European order, the Clinton administration made the fateful decision to expand NATO eastward. Not once, not twice, 5 times, wave after wave of NATO expansion, each one pushing the alliance closer to Russia's borders, each one violating the implicit understanding, the gentleman's agreement that had allowed the Cold War to end peacefully. Let me be clear about what happened. George H.W. Bush, in private conversations with L. Gorbachev, essentially promised that NATO would not expand 1 inch eastward. This was not written down in a treaty, but it was understood. It was the foundation of the new European order. And then the moment Russia weakened in the 1990s, Washington discarded that promise. Poland joined NATO in 1999. Then the Baltic. Then Ukraine became the prize, the great prize, because Ukraine sits directly on Russia's border. It is home to millions of ethnic Russians. And historically, it has been within Russia's sphere of influence for centuries. But it was not just NATO expansion. America also pursued a global sanctions regime designed to economically strangle Russia. After the 2008 financial crisis, after Russia's intervention in Georgia, after Crimea, after the Donbass, the United States imposed sanctions, layer upon layer of economic sanctions designed to weaken Russia, to topple Putin, to force regime change. And when those sanctions did not work, when they only hardened Russian resolve and pushed Moscow into an alliance with China, Washington doubled down. This is the pattern. This is the pathology. American policymakers believed they could reshape the world in their image. They believed American power was permanent and unchallengeable. They believed they could push Russia into a corner, economically isolate it, surround it militarily, and Moscow would simply accept American hegemony. It never works. It has never worked in history. And Russia's response, Russia's military posture shift, is the inevitable consequence of American strategic overreach. Now, picture this scenario. From Moscow's perspective, you are a great power. You have nuclear weapons. You have territorial integrity that you believe is under threat. For 30 years, You have watched a military alliance, an alliance explicitly created to contain. You move inexorably toward your borders. You have issued warnings. You have issued threats. You have made your red lines explicit, and the West ignores you. The West continues. The West accelerates. At what point do you respond? At what point does accepting this encirclement become not strategic patience but strategic suicide? Russia had to respond not because Putin is an aggressive dictator, but because great powers do not permit their vital interests to be trampled without consequence. This is not moral philosophy. This is not ideology. This is the fundamental logic of international relations. When a state's security is threatened, it responds with military force. Russia moved air defense systems, deployed strategic bombers, repositioned ground forces, conducted naval exercises, and updated its military doctrine to explicitly acknowledge NATO expansion as a core threat. From Washington's perspective, this looks like aggression. From Moscow's perspective, this looks like the minimum necessary response to preserve national security. And here is what Washington does not understand. Russia is not trying to invade NATO. Russia is not trying to conquer Europe. Russia is trying to prevent NATO from conquering Russia. There is a profound difference. Russia is playing defense in a game where America is playing offense. This is not the first time America has made this mistake. The Monroe Doctrine, the post-World War II containment strategy, the Cuban Missile Crisis, all of these moments teach us the same lesson. When a great power feels encircled and threatened, it responds with military force. When a declining hegemon tries to maintain its dominance through military expansion, it accelerates the very multipolar competition it seeks to prevent. Kennedy understood this during the Cuban Missile Crisis. When America discovered Soviet missiles in Cuba, Kennedy did not respond with military strikes. He recognized that the Soviets had placed those missiles there because they felt encircled, because America had surrounded them with bases and military infrastructure. Kennedy negotiated. Kennedy made concessions. He removed American missiles from Turkey, and he did it quietly without announcing it to the world to preserve American credibility. That is what statesmanship looks like. But modern America has no Kennedy. Modern America has ideologues in the State Department who believe that American power is permanent, that the uniolar moment is eternal, that Russia can be contained indefinitely through economic sanctions and military encirclement. They are wrong. And NATO's expansion into high-risk territory is the evidence of their error. Let me explain the specific military response Russia has undertaken because the details matter. Russia has deployed S-400 air defense systems to new positions closer to NATO airspace. These are advanced mobile systems capable of engaging aircraft at ranges exceeding 100 MeV. Russia has repositioned 260 strategic bombers, the largest bombers in the world capable of carrying nuclear weapons, to bases that allow them to reach NATO airspace within hours. Russia has increased submarine operations in the North Atlantic, in the Black Sea. Russia has updated its military doctrine to explicitly designate NATO expansion as a trigger for escalation. Russia has conducted joint military exercises with China and Iran. Russia has accelerated its hypersonic missile programs. These are not the actions of a desperate dictator lashing out. These are the coordinated, methodical actions of a great power recalibrating its military posture to match a new strategic reality. And crucially, these deployments are not as far forward as they could be. Russia has not invaded NATO territory. Russia has not attacked NATO bases. Russia has simply moved forces closer to its own borders, within its own airspace, within its own territory. From a technical military standpoint, Russia is doing exactly what NATO did for 30 years, moving forces closer to the adversary's border. But when Russia does it, it is called aggression. When NATO does it, it is called collective defense. This asymmetry in how the West interprets identical behavior is itself a kind of intellectual dishonesty. What we are witnessing with NATO's expansion and Russia's response is something far larger. We are witnessing the death of the uniolar moment. For 30 years after the Cold War ended, America was the global hegemon, no peer competitor, no alternative center of power. But that era is ending. China is rising. Russia has proven it cannot be contained. The dollar's dominance is being challenged. The BRICS are creating alternative financial infrastructure, and every military move NATO makes, every sanction the West imposes only accelerates the formation of a multipolar world where America is one great power among several, rather than the sole superpower. Russia's military posture shift is not an aberration. It is the leading edge of a larger historical transformation. It is the visible sign that unipolarity is finished, and instead of accepting this reality and adapting, Washington is doubling down. It is expanding NATO further. It is escalating the confrontation. It is creating exactly the conditions that guarantee a multipolar world will emerge faster and more chaotically than it otherwise might have. Why did America not see this coming? Why was Washington genuinely surprised by Russia's military response? The answer is hubris. The answer is the belief among American policymakers that the rules that govern great power, competition, somehow do not apply to America, that American expansion is virtuous, that American military superiority is permanent, that the post-Cold War international system can be maintained indefinitely through military dominance and economic coercion. This is what happens when a great power believes its own propaganda. American officials, genuinely convinced so that Russia was a declining power that could be managed through sanctions and NATO encirclement. They ignored the fact that Russia has nuclear weapons. They ignored the fact that Russia sits on enormous natural resources. They ignored the fact that Russia has 1,000 years of history of defending its territorial integrity. They ignored everything that should have been obvious. The consequences of this moment will ripple across the world. In the Middle East, other regional powers will see that defying America carries a price, but it is a price that can be paid. In the Pacific, China will accelerate its military modernization and its challenge to American dominance. In the South China Sea, in Europe, the cost of living will increase as energy security becomes more uncertain. The risk of miscalculation, a NATO plane shot down over the Black Sea, a Russian warship sunk in the Baltic increases with every day that passes, and most dangerously, America's credibility is being damaged. American commitments to allies are now questioned. Is America truly reliable? Would America actually risk nuclear war over Estonia? Would America actually risk World War II over a NATO member that most Americans cannot locate on a map? These questions are now openly discussed in foreign policy circles, and the answers erode American power more effectively than any Russian military deployment could. History will judge this moment with clarity that eludes us now. In 50 years, scholars will look back at NATO's expansion into high-risk territory and Russia's military response, and they will ask, did nobody see this coming? Did nobody understand that great powers do not accept encirclement? Did nobody read the history books? The answer is that some of us did see it coming. Some of us warned it. Some of us understood that the uniolar moment was a historical aberration, not a permanent condition. But our warnings were dismissed as pessimism, as appeasement, as a failure of American confidence. The clock is ticking. Russia's military posture shift is a message. It is a signal that Moscow is prepared for confrontation, that Washington has pushed a nuclear power into a corner, that the comfortable 30-year period of American dominance is ending. The question now is not whether Russia will respond. Russia has responded. The question is whether America will recognize this reality and adjust its strategy before miscalculation triggers a conflict that nobody can control. Because here is the truth about great power politics. Superpowers rarely collapse from external attack. They collapse from self-inflicted wounds. And America is inflicting those wounds upon itself